Lieutenant Ava Thompson woke before dawn, the cold bite of the morning air doing nothing to shake the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The camp was quiet except for the distant hum of helicopters preparing for deployment, the metallic clatter of soldiers' boots on concrete, and the occasional bark of orders. Ava stood alone for a moment, staring at the rising sun behind the jagged mountains that marked the edges of the war zone. She breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of what was to come. This mission wasn't routine. It was dangerous, deadly. And yet, she felt a spark of something she couldn't name, anticipation perhaps, or a stubborn determination that no danger could extinguish. She had not always been this woman hardened by drills and battle strategy. Growing up in a small town, Ava had been fascinated by stories of bravery, of ordinary people standing against overwhelming odds. Her younger brother, Ethan, had always been her partner in adventure, dragging her up trees, racing her down muddy trails, challenging her to be faster, stronger, braver. When Ethan died unexpectedly in a car accident, Ava's world shifted. She realized that courage wasn't just a choice in fiction, it was a necessity in life. She made a promise that day, a silent oath whispered over the empty space his laughter had left behind. She would live a life that mattered. She would protect others. She would face danger head on. The Army had become her proving ground. Boot camp had been a brutal awakening, but Ava had thrived where others faltered. She remembered the first time she had outrun every soldier in the mile test, drenched in sweat, lungs burning, while her peers fell behind, gasping. She remembered learning to wield every weapon the Army provided, and then some, her fingers moving instinctively over triggers and safety catches, as though the rifle were an extension of her own body. Every grueling drill, every shouted command had forged her into someone who could survive when others might not. But she never let toughness dull her humanity. She still laughed with her squad, still shared quiet moments over coffee or letters from home, still carried a photograph of Ethan tucked in her uniform. Her current squad had learned quickly that Ava was someone they could rely on in chaos. Sergeant Malik, grizzled and skeptical at first, now nodded at her with respect. "Thompson, you ready for this hellhole?" he asked, voice rough, eyes scanning the distant tree line for any movement. Ava's reply was calm, measured, as ready as I'll ever be. Her squad was a mix of personalities, some quiet, some brash, some constantly joking to mask fear, but all competent, all loyal. Among them, Private Rosa was the youngest, barely out of training, wide-eyed and eager, and Ava felt a protective instinct for her. The others had their own reasons for fighting, but Ava knew the mission demanded something beyond personal motivations. It demanded absolute focus, the ability to push past fear, pain, and exhaustion. The briefing had been clear. Their objective was to secure a strategic outpost that intelligence suggested was heavily defended by enemy forces. The operation was high risk. The terrain was unfamiliar and ambushes were likely. Yet Ava had studied every map, memorized every potential route, and rehearsed escape strategies in her mind over and over. She knew what was expected, not just success, but survival. As the helicopters hummed louder, preparing to transport them into enemy territory, Ava took a moment to observe her surroundings. The other soldiers were checking gear, double-checking weapons, and exchanging tense nods. Fear was unspoken but present. She felt it too, but she let it fuel her focus rather than weaken her. She adjusted her vest, secured her helmet, and felt the weight of her rifle, a familiar comfort against her shoulder. This was not just a machine, it was her lifeline. The flight over the mountains was silent in most of the helicopters. Soldiers stared at the landscape below, green valleys giving way to rocky outcrops and the skeletal remains of abandoned villages. Ava's mind wandered briefly to Ethan again. She imagined telling him she was doing this, living this life he never got to see. She felt a mix of grief and strength, sorrow and resolve. When the helicopters landed near the drop zone, the world seemed to change in an instant. The air was thick, almost electric with tension. Ava and her squad disembarked, moving with practiced efficiency through the rough terrain. Every footstep was measured, every glance scanning for signs of danger. The forest around them seemed almost alive, the rustle of leaves and distant caws of birds sounding unnervingly like whispers in the shadows. They had not gone far when the first signs appeared. A broken fence, a scavenged weapon discarded in haste, footprints too large for any local animal. Ava signaled her squad to halt. Her instincts screamed that this was no random patrol. They were being watched. The forest seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier. Every muscle in her body tensed, every sense alert. She thought of the stories she had read about soldiers walking into traps, about lives ending in seconds. And yet, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Hours later, as the sun climbed and shadows shifted across the jagged terrain, the squad set up a temporary rest point. Ava checked her gear, observed her surroundings, and gave brief instructions for watch rotations. Even in this brief calm, she felt the pulse of anticipation, the feeling that something was about to erupt. And it did. The distant echo of gunfire, muffled but unmistakable, reached them first. Then came the sharp crack of rifle shots closer by. The enemy was near. Ava's heart rate spiked, but she did not panic. She barked orders with precision, moving her squad into defensive positions. Every lesson from training, every ounce of experience was a tool in her hands. As the first shadows of confrontation stretched across the forest floor, Ava knew one thing with absolute certainty. This mission would test her like never before. She would face danger, chaos, and death itself, and she would not give up. Not now, not ever. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of blood red and orange. Ava tightened her grip on her rifle, scanning the tree line. The battle was coming, and when it did, she would stand alone if she had to, because surrender was never an option. The first shots rang out like thunder, cutting through the stillness of the forest. Ava's instincts kicked in immediately. Her squad scattered, seeking cover behind jagged rocks and fallen trees, rifles snapping up as they tried to identify the source of fire. Bullets tore through branches, sending splinters raining down, and the sharp smell of gunpowder filled the air. "Positions! Spread out!" Ava shouted, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She darted behind a fallen log, scanning for movement, eyes sharp, mind sharper. Her training had drilled these reactions into her muscles and reflexes, but nothing could truly prepare a soldier for the reality of being under fire. The enemy had them in a tight corridor of dense forest, the only paths marked by shallow trenches and scorched earth. They were more prepared than the intelligence had suggested, waiting patiently for the squad to move into their trap. Ava's heart skipped a beat when a volley of bullets struck dangerously close, spraying dirt and debris over her shoulders. She returned fire instinctively, every pull of the trigger precise and controlled. "Thompson, over there!" Sergeant Malik's voice cracked through the chaos. He was pinned down behind a jagged boulder, sweat streaming down his face, eyes wide with the fight-or-flight panic that had no place in his training, but now clawed at him. Ava sprinted toward him, narrowly dodging another spray of bullets. They exchanged a quick glance, communicating without words. Their squad had been decimated before they even fully realized the ambush. Private Rose's scream echoed from down the line, and Ava turned just in time to see a fellow soldier fall. Blood stained the dirt, and chaos threatened to engulf them all. Ava's mind raced. They were outnumbered, they were trapped, and yet surrender was not an option. She barked orders with clarity, directing the survivors to form a defensive perimeter. Her voice cut through the panic like a blade, and for a moment, it was enough. The firefight escalated. Enemy soldiers pressed forward, using the thick forest as cover. Ava ducked behind a boulder, taking a deep breath, then lobbed a smoke grenade to obscure the enemy's line of sight. She moved with calculated precision, darting from cover to cover, returning fire, and guiding her squad mates. Each shot, each movement was a dance between life and death, and every moment counted. But the odds were cruel. Explosions rocked the forest floor as an enemy mortar landed near their position, throwing dirt, debris, and bodies into the air. Ava felt the heat of the blast on her skin and instinctively pressed herself flat, her ears ringing. When the dust settled, she realized the squad had fractured further. Some soldiers were pinned, others had fled, and a number were wounded too severely to move. She forced herself to remain calm. Panic was lethal. Hesitation was lethal. Survival meant focus, strategy, and courage beyond the ordinary. Ava grabbed Rosa, who was trembling violently, and dragged her behind cover. "Stay down, stay quiet. We'll make it," she whispered, her voice firm, almost more for herself than for the private. A moment of grim calculation passed. Ava knew she couldn't hold the line indefinitely. She needed an escape plan. She scanned the terrain, memorizing every rock, every tree, every shadow, looking for weaknesses in the enemy formation. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her mind worked with laser precision. She would survive. Somehow. She had to. As she prepared to move, a sharp crack split the air, and a bullet tore through the ground inches from her foot. Ava's vision narrowed, every sense screaming danger. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding another shot, and realized that the enemy had flanked them. Their numbers were overwhelming, their strategy calculated. Ava's heart sank for a fleeting moment, not because she doubted herself, but because the stakes were real. The lives of her squad depended on her decisions. A scream pierced the chaos again. Ava turned to see one of her comrades pinned under debris from a falling tree, another soldier unconscious from a close-range explosion. The forest, once silent and almost serene, had become a killing field. Ava grabbed a wounded rifle from a fallen soldier, reloading with precision, and fired at advancing enemies, buying precious seconds. Then came the critical moment. Ava realized she'd been separated from the main group entirely. The smoke, the dust, and the chaos had created a maze of confusion. Rosa clung to her arm, eyes wide, face pale. We're alone," she whispered. Ava nodded, swallowing fear, and whispered back, "Not alone. We have each other. We survive." Every movement now was deliberate. Ava guided Rosa through the forest, staying low, avoiding open paths, and using the terrain to their advantage. They crawled through underbrush, paused behind large rocks, and navigated the remnants of burned-out vehicles and shattered trees. Ava's body ached, her wounds stung, but she ignored the pain. Pain was irrelevant. Survival was everything. Hours seemed to pass like minutes as they moved cautiously, the forest alive with enemy movement. Ava's ears caught faint footsteps, the crunch of leaves under boots that didn't belong to them. She signaled Rosa to stay still, flattening them against the ground as two enemy soldiers passed mere meters away, unaware of their presence. Every breath was shallow, every heartbeat a drum of tension. Eventually, they reached a small, ruined outpost, partially hidden by overgrown foliage. Ava assessed the area, checking for traps and enemy surveillance. She pulled Rosa behind a collapsed wall and whispered, "We rest for a few minutes, then move again. Eyes open, ears open. We survive together." As night began to fall, the forest transformed once more. Shadows lengthened, the air cooled, and every rustle sounded like a threat. Ava tended to Rosa's minor injuries, her hands steady despite exhaustion. She couldn't let herself falter. The second they relaxed, they would be at the mercy of the enemy. Ava's mind flickered to the squad she had lost, the friends she might never see again. Guilt gnawed at her, but she suppressed it. Survival was now her mission, not just for herself, but for those who had fallen. She had to make it out alive to honor them. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Ava crouched beside the crumbling wall, rifle ready, senses straining for the faintest hint of movement. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was still searching. Somewhere, the rest of her squad was fighting, retreating, or hiding. And somewhere, a choice awaited that could mean life or death. Ava's jaw tightened. She would not give up. She could not. She had faced impossible odds before, and she would face them again. The night stretched on, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound a warning. Yet in the silence between gunfire, she felt a spark of determination. She would survive, alone if necessary. She would fight, she would endure, she would refuse to give up. And deep in the forest, unseen and unrelenting, the danger was far from over. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, each rustle of leaves a possible threat. Ava Thompson pressed herself against the rough bark of a tree, rifle ready, eyes scanning the darkness. The firefight had ended hours ago, but the danger had not. She and Private Rosa were alone, separated from the rest of the squad, wounded and deep in enemy territory. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ambush now pulsed as a constant hum in her veins, sharp, demanding, unrelenting. Rosa shivered beside her, clutching her arm where a bullet had grazed her shoulder. We can't keep running like this forever," she whispered, voice trembling. Ava shook her head, forcing calm into her tone. We move carefully, we stay quiet, we survive. That's all we can do. Trust me. She gave Rosa a small, reassuring nod, though inside, every nerve in her body screamed caution. Survival meant focus, and focus demanded suppressing fear, even when it clawed at her chest. Ava led them through narrow paths carved by animals and the occasional soldier, moving silently through the underbrush. Her eyes caught every flicker of movement, the glint of metal in the moonlight, a shadow that didn't belong, a branch that snapped too sharply. Each sound demanded instant analysis, threat or misdirection, enemy or forest. She relied on instinct honed by years of training and experience, balancing caution with urgency. Hours passed, hunger gnawed at them, exhaustion pressed against every muscle, and pain radiated from bruises and grazed skin. Ava paused briefly behind a rock, checking Rosa's bandaged arm and herself. Every wound was a reminder of the cost of this mission, but she refused to let them slow her down. She scavenged a small water pouch from her pack, offering it to Rosa first. "Drink. We keep moving." The night deepened, and the enemy's presence became almost tangible. Ava could feel it in the air, hear it in distant footsteps, and sense it in the sudden silence that fell between every sound. She knew they were being hunted, that any careless movement could be their last. She scanned ahead, noting a ruined building partially hidden by overgrowth. It offered temporary cover and a vantage point. Slowly, silently, she guided Rosa toward it, keeping low, every step calculated. Inside the building, Ava crouched behind a crumbling wall, listening. The enemy had not yet detected them. She examined the debris, broken furniture, shards of glass, loose bricks. Survival demanded improvisation. She scavenged nails and wires, fashioning a crude trap near the entrance, knowing it might buy them seconds or even save their lives. She handed Rosa a small piece of metal. "If anyone comes in, we make them think twice." Rosa nodded, a mix of fear and admiration in her eyes. The hours crawled by. Ava whispered strategies, keeping Rosa's morale steady. "We move at first light. Shadows favor us now, but daylight will give the enemy too much advantage. We wait, we observe, we survive." Her voice was calm, authoritative, a tether of sanity in the chaos. Memories surfaced unbidden. Her brother Ethan's laugh, her mother's worried eyes, the faces of fallen comrades from training missions, all flashing in rapid succession. Ava drew strength from them. Each memory reinforced her determination. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about honoring those who couldn't. Her heartbeat steadied, her focus sharpened, and she resolved she would not be defeated. Not tonight, not ever. Suddenly, a sound snapped her out of reverie. A faint shuffle, almost imperceptible. Ava froze, rifle raised, eyes narrowing. 2 enemy soldiers were patrolling nearby, their voices muffled but clear enough to detect. She whispered to Rosa, "Stay low, don't move." Holding her breath, Ava watched them approach the building. The soldiers paused at the entrance, scanning, unaware of the traps Ava had set. A branch snapped under one boot, and they froze, heads turning sharply. Ava tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. When one soldier stepped on the metal trap, it clanged loudly, startling them. In the confusion, Ava seized the moment, her first real opportunity to act. She fired a controlled shot, precise and deliberate, taking down the nearest enemy. The second soldier spun, panic in his eyes. Ava rolled from cover, firing again, forcing him to retreat. The night erupted briefly in chaos, but Ava and Rosa slipped out the back, moving silently, the adrenaline sharp, pain momentarily forgotten. They traveled through the forest, avoiding main paths, using streams and shadows for concealment. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at them, but Ava pushed onward, every step a calculated risk. She found a shallow cave just before dawn and led Rosa inside. They rested briefly, wounds tended with limited supplies, and minds focused on the next move. Morning brought its own dangers. Sunlight pierced the canopy, revealing their presence to any nearby enemy patrols. Ava had to move. She scanned the terrain, noting a distant ridge that might offer safety, or at least a vantage to plan their next move. Every step was measured, every noise was a potential alarm. Her mind worked overtime, calculating angles, escape routes, and contingencies. Ava reflected briefly on the cost of being alone. The squad she had led, the friends she had lost, the faces she might never see again, they all fueled her resolve. Survivor's guilt gnawed at her, but she turned it into determination. She would make it out alive, not just for herself, but for them. As the sun climbed high, Ava scanned the horizon. Somewhere ahead was a path to safety, reinforcements, survival. But she knew this. Danger was still close, enemy soldiers could be anywhere, and exhaustion was a constant adversary. She gritted her teeth, shoulders stiff with fatigue, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Come on," she whispered to Rosa, voice low but firm. "We keep going. We survive. Together." And in the silent forest, with danger lurking in every shadow, Ava Thompson moved forward, unwavering, alone if necessary, but refusing, absolutely refusing, to give up. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the war-torn forest. Ava Thompson pressed herself against a jagged rock, eyes scanning the terrain below. Her body ached from exhaustion, every muscle screaming from the relentless hours of running, crawling, and fighting. Her wounds burned, but she ignored them. Every step forward was survival, every breath a defiance of the enemy that sought to end her life. Rosa clung to her side, pale but determined, trusting Ava to guide them through the nightmare. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ava's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but her voice was firm, unwavering. "We have to. Keep moving. We're almost there. Don't stop. Not now." Ava had spotted the path leading to higher ground, the ridge that would give them line of sight toward friendly forces. But getting there meant crossing an open clearing, one that could expose them to enemy patrols. Every instinct screamed caution, but hesitation now could be fatal. She weighed her options carefully, calculating angles, cover, and timing. Then, with a nod to Rosa, she led them forward, low and swift, hearts pounding. Halfway across the clearing, movement flickered at the tree line. Ava froze, signaling Rosa to stay down. A squad of enemy soldiers emerged, patrolling the ridge with lethal precision. Ava assessed their numbers. 5, maybe 6. Too many for a head-on confrontation. But retreat wasn't an option. Their position was already compromised. Ava's mind raced, calculating. Improvised distractions, traps, terrain advantage. She spotted a small pile of rocks and debris slightly downhill. Whispering instructions to Rosa, she positioned herself near the rocks, ready. The first enemy soldier stepped too close, and Ava struck, hurling a rock with perfect aim. It clattered loudly against a tree, drawing the squad's attention. "Now!" she hissed, and they sprinted toward a cluster of boulders, rolling into cover as bullets tore through the air. Her heart thundered, adrenaline masking pain. She fired controlled shots to cover their retreat, picking off one soldier and forcing the others to take defensive positions. Her tactical brilliance shone. Every move was precise, calculated, lethal. The squad broke formation, leaving a gap. Ava seized the opportunity, pulling Rosa along as they navigated the rocky terrain, finally reaching the ridge. From this vantage point, Ava could see the faint silhouettes of friendly reinforcements moving toward the enemy's position. Relief surged through her, but she knew this wasn't over. They still had to survive long enough to reach them. A sudden shout echoed from below. An enemy soldier had spotted them. Ava didn't hesitate. She ducked behind a boulder, rifle raised, and took the shot. The enemy soldier went down silently. Another one turned, alert, weapon raised, but Ava was faster, more precise, more focused. Each enemy that fell brought them closer to safety. Hours seemed to pass in moments as Ava led Rosa down the final stretch, using shadows, rocks, and foliage to their advantage. They were battered, exhausted, but alive. And then, in the distance, a signal, a flare rising into the sky, marked the approach of their reinforcements. Soldiers from their unit, along with support from Allied forces, advanced swiftly, engaging the enemy position. Ava allowed herself a brief breath, adrenaline still roaring, but hope beginning to bloom. They were not alone anymore. Friendly voices called out, confirming their position, guiding them toward safety. Ava and Rosa emerged from cover, weak but unbroken. They were quickly pulled into the relative safety of their reinforcements, embraced by the squad members who had survived or arrived to assist. The battle was over, but the toll was evident. Ava looked around at the aftermath, the fallen comrades, the scorched earth, the silence that followed the storm. Her chest ached, not just from exertion, but from the weight of survival. Each life lost was a reminder of the cost of courage, and yet she had endured. She had refused to give up. Medics tended to her wounds, but Ava's mind was elsewhere. She thought of those she had lost, her squad, the friends, the mentors who had believed in her. She remembered Ethan and the promise she had made to him so many years ago. Courage wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about surviving, persevering, and honoring those who could not. The commanding officer approached, face stern but eyes filled with respect. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, voice low but firm, "your actions today saved lives. You faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Your bravery is exemplary." Ava nodded, acknowledging the words but not seeking praise. She knew the real story was not in awards or commendations. It was in the resilience, the sheer refusal to give in when the world was against her. As the sun began to set, casting long golden beams across the scarred forest, Ava stood quietly, surveying the battlefield. Her body ached, her wounds burned, and her spirit exhausted, but she was alive. Every fallen comrade, every close call, every desperate moment had led her here. She had survived where many would have faltered. She had fought alone against overwhelming odds and refused to give up. Rosa approached, eyes wide, admiration and relief mingling on her face. "Lieutenant, I don't know how we made it," she whispered. Ava placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We made it because we refused to stop, because we kept moving, and because we refused to give up. Remember that." The two women stood together, the echoes of battle fading behind them, and for a moment there was peace. Not the peace of safety, but the peace of survival, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even in the darkest moments, courage could shine. Later, back at base, Ava received the formal commendations, medals, certificates, and the respectful nods of fellow soldiers. But she accepted them quietly, knowing true victory was not in recognition, but in the act of enduring, surviving, and honoring those who could not. As night fell, Ava stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, the wind tugging at her uniform, the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. She thought of Ethan, of her squad, of the battles yet to come. She clenched her fists, a small, defiant smile on her face. The world was unforgiving, life was fragile, and danger was never far. But Ava Thompson had faced death alone, endured, and refused to give up. And that, she knew, was the true measure of a soldier. The forest was quiet now, but in her heart, the fire of determination burned brighter than ever. No matter the odds, no matter the enemy, no matter the fear, Ava would always rise. She had faced death and stared it in the eyes. She had refused to give up, and she would do it again every time, because courage was her choice, and she would never stop choosing it.